Hi, I'm Kat and I work at the Olympia REI store. I've been mountain biking for about 15 years and I am a year-round bike commuter. I started working in the bike shop about 2 years ago and I've been working on my own bikes for a couple years prior to that. Today we're going to talk about the parts of your bike so you can get a little bit more familiar with the terminology that we'll be using. We are going to go through a pre-ride inspection so you feel comfortable making sure that your bike is safe for every ride. Thirdly, we're going to go through a fix-a-flat demo so you feel comfortable taking care of one of the more common problems that most riders encounter while they're riding. And lastly, we're going to go through drivetrain maintenance so you can keep your chain and gears in good working order for every ride. Today I'm going to be demonstrating these maintenance skills on a mountain bike, but they are applicable to whatever bike you have at home. As you're following along in the video today, have your bike handy so you can follow along with the skills that I'm showing you. I may ask you to pause the video so you can practice those skills a few times. There are going to be links in the video so you can get linked to our website for more tips. If you have any questions that aren't answered here, you can go to REI Conversations, which is our online forum where you can pose those questions and get an answer. There are a few basic tools that you'll need to complete these maintenance tasks. There is a complete list of the tools on our website, some of which you may already have at in your toolbox at home, and we're going to go over those specific tools as we get to those maintenance skills. Today we're going to cover parts of your bike and get you familiar with some of the terminology as it relates to your bike. So if you go into a shop or I use a word that you were unfamiliar with, you'll actually know a little bit about what I'm talking about. By the end of this class, you'll know the parts of your bike, where they are on your bike, and a bit about how they work. The four main parts we're going to go through are the frame, the cockpit, the wheels, and your drivetrain. Starting with the frame, it's made up of two triangles, your front triangle and your rear triangle. Your front triangle is here, and then your rear triangle is there. Frame materials vary. The most common ones that you'll see are steel, carbon, and aluminum, and sometimes your bike might have a combination of two of those. Next, we're going to move on to the cockpit, which is your handlebars and stem and everything on them. This also happens to be the most customizable part of your bike. So if there's anything that doesn't feel quite right, you don't feel like your shifters are in the right spot for your fingers to reach, your grips don't feel very good, you're able to customize and move around all of these parts on your cockpit so it is more comfortable for you to ride your bike. Next, we're going to talk about your wheels. And starting from the inside out, they are composed of several different components, and we're going to just talk about the main ones. So in the middle, you have your hub. This is what conceals your bearings and makes your wheels spin. From there, we have our spokes that attach the hub to the rim of the wheel. And then you have your actual rim and your tire and your tube around the outside of the rim. Depending on what type of bike you have, you may have a rim brake bike, and that means that the braking surface is on your actual rim. Or you might have, like in this case, a disc brake bike where your brake pads go around the rotor, and that is how you stop your bike. There are a couple different types of valves to inflate your tires. This happens to be a Schrader valve. There's also Presta valves, and we're going to go over more in detail what those two things are when we talk about how to change your flat. Depending on your bike, you're going to find it usually is listed on the sidewall of your tire, the size. This is important when you are picking up spare tubes for your bike to carry with you on a ride or just have some spares at home. You'll also find on the sidewall of your tire your minimum and maximum PSI, so the range that you want to pump your tires up in between. Lastly, we're going to talk about your drivetrain, which encompasses all the things that make your bike go. That includes your chain, your cassette, your derailleurs, and also your crank. So you can remember what we just covered. There is a parts of your bike graphic linked in the video. Next, we are going to go over a pre-ride inspection that you can do before every ride to make sure that your bike is in safe working order. We use the ABC Quick Check. A is for air, B is for brakes, C is for chain and cranks, and Quick Check is just a couple extra things to check before you get on your bike. Starting with A, which is air, we want to make sure that our tires are aired up and ready to go before we take off on our ride. First thing you can do is take your hand and put it over your tire like this and grab or push down with the palm of your hand. If it feels firm or it feels like you had just pumped it up, you're good to go. If it feels a little squishier than normal, it's probably a good idea to attach your pump and make sure that there's enough air in your tire. First of all, we want to make sure that we know where our PSI range is, which is on the sidewall of the tire. Depending on what type of a ride you're looking for in your bike, you might want to go on the lower end of that PSI range or the higher end of that PSI range. More air in your tires, you're going to feel more of the road. A lower PSI, especially with a heavier rider, you might run the risk of getting a pinch flat, which we're going to talk about in more detail in the Fix a Flat section. Also, there are a couple different valve types on your bike. This one happens to be a Schrader valve. You can tell that it's a Schrader valve because it looks exactly like the valve that you have on your vehicle. Presta valves, will show an example of that later on in Fix a Flat. You also want to make sure that with whatever pump you have, that it is compatible with your valve type. If you have an older pump, you might want to make sure that it is the right valve type if it was pre-Presta valve. Go ahead and attach your pump. Make sure that your lever is locked in the locked position and pump up to whatever desired pressure you want in your tires. For Schrader valves especially, make sure that you don't forget to put your cap back on your valve to keep any dirt or debris from filling up the hole in your valve. Next up is B, which is for brakes. We want to make sure that our brakes are in good working order before we get on our bike and go for a ride. First thing that I usually recommend is to stand over your cockpit, put both hands on your brake levers and give them a good squeeze. If they pull all the way to your grips, or they feel spongy or aren't releasing in the way that if they kind of are sticking when you release them, that's a good indication that you should bring your bike into a shop and have that checked out. I also like to isolate both the front and the rear brake to make sure that both are working well. Starting with the front brake, which in most cases is your left hand, grab and pull the brake lever. Give your bike a shove, and if the rear wheel comes off the ground, that means that your front brake is working. For your rear, right is rear in most cases. Grab your rear brake, push your bike along the ground, and if your rear wheel skids, that means that your rear brakes are in good working order. After you check your brakes, if anything doesn't feel right, just go ahead and take your bike into a shop, as it is a little bit more of a complicated process to fix them on your own. Next up is C, which is for chain. We want to make sure that everything is running through the gears smoothly. So while your bike's on the ground, just go ahead and grab your pedal and start pedaling backwards, just making sure that nothing is sticking as you are pedaling backwards and your chain is running through the cassette and the derailleur. Also, as part of C is cranks. I want to make sure that there's no play in my cranks, so just go ahead, take your hands on the very ends of your crank arms and just try to give a wiggle back and forth to make sure that the crank arms aren't loose or there isn't any play in your bottom bracket. Last step is the quick check, and we just want to make sure that, especially if you have a quick release skewer bike, that your skewer levers are closed all the way and firmly. So just go ahead and just make sure that you can't open them very easily and it's a little bit hard to close them all the way. And lastly, in that quick check piece, get on your bike, go for a ride around the block, run through all of your gears, make sure that you brake, do some hard braking, make sure that everything feels good, and then you're ready to ride your bike. Next up, we're going to talk about how to fix a flat, which is one of the more common issues that riders will encounter while they're riding their bike. You will need some specific tools, which we'll go over in just a little bit. We're going to break it down into 6 easy steps, which is removing your wheel from your frame, removing the tire from the rim, trying to find where the flat occurred, and then talking through whether to replace or patch the tube. And then we're going to learn how to put the tube and the tire back onto your rim and how to reinstall your wheel onto your frame. The tools you're going to need for fixing a flat are a tire pump, a set of tire levers, a tube that fits your wheel and your tire. Depending on your axle, you might need a multi-tool with a set of Allens, and especially if you're looking at your flat kit while you're riding, a set of patches, whether glue or glueless, are a good thing to have with you. So before we take off our wheel, we need to look at our bike and determine a couple things first. First of all, what type of brakes do you have? If you have disc brakes, there's really nothing that you need to do with the brakes in order to take your wheel out of your frame. If you have rim brakes, there's usually some sort of mechanism that you need to release in order to get the brake arms to come apart wide enough so your wheel can fall away from the frame. So here's an example of a rim style brake. What I'm going to do is squeeze the brake arms and pull the noodle, and that opens up the brake pads away from the rim so the tire can clear those brake pads on the way out. Sometimes with rim brake bikes, you might have one that has a lever that you have to flip up, but make sure that you do this step before moving on to your axle. So I'm actually gonna have you go ahead and pause the video so you can look at your bike and practice disengaging your rim brakes if that's what you have, and just getting to know the type of brakes that you have in case you do have to disengage those in order to get your wheel out. So once we've disengaged our brake, if we have to, we're gonna move on to our axle. There are a lot of different axles out there. In this case, with the bike that I have in front of me, it is a quick release axle, and you might have a through axle at home, and we'll show an example of that as well. So in this case, there is a lever on one side that I'm going to open up. I'm gonna put my other hand on the nut and unscrew the nut until my wheel falls out of my frame. So here's an example of a through axle. This one happens to be a quick release through axle. In order to take this out of my hub, I'm going to open up my lever and then just start to unscrew my axle from the threads. Grab onto my tire so when I pull my axle out, my tire doesn't just fall right to the ground. And then my wheel drops out of my fork. So this is an example of a through axle that does require an Allen tool. What I'm going to do is insert my Allen tool into my axle and just start to turn to unthread. And if I were going to be taking my wheel out, I would take my axle out, drop my wheel. So now I'm going to have you pause the video so you can go to your own bike and practice that a couple of times. So we're going to move on to the rear wheel, and some of the steps are the same as what we learned in the front wheel, and some of the steps are a little bit different. To start with, what we want to do is make sure that our chain is as far away from our wheel as possible. So what I'm going to have you do is grab your rear shifter and your pedal and shift all the way down into your hardest gear, which is the smallest cog in the back. This gets the chain in a position where it is the easiest to get the wheel out of the frame. Next, if you have a rim brake bike, you're going to go ahead and disengage those brakes. In our case, we have a disc brake bike, so we don't have to worry about that. And then we're going to open up our axle and unscrew our nut until you start to feel your wheel drop out from the frame. I usually like to take my left hand and grab the wheel so it doesn't just fall right out from the frame. And what I do with my left hand is we need to move our rear derailleur out of the way so the cassette can clear the derailleur and the chain. So what I'm going to do is I like to take my hand, my four fingers here, and kind of pull the derailleur back and out of the way. And then my wheel starts to drop out. I take my thumb, put it on, there's usually a little tab on the back of your derailleur cage. I push that down so I can move the wheel out from in between the chain. If you don't have a stand at home, or if this happens to occur on a ride, there is a way that you can flip your bike over and take the wheel out. So same steps as when your bike is facing right side down. We're going to open up the skewer on the one side, take our other hand and unscrew the nut on the other side. And as soon as we can kind of feel that the wheel is lifting out of the frame, we're going to grab it with our hand, move our derailleur out of the way, move the chain so you can clear the cassette out of the way as well. So now that our wheel is out of our bike, I have a quick note for anyone with hydraulic disc brakes. Just be careful not to compress the brake lever because it can cause the pads to get too close together and they can't go back to their original position, and that will cause you to not be able to get the rotor back in between the pads when you try to put your wheel back in the frame. So this is where I'm going to have you all pause the video and practice those additional steps to get and do that several times so you can get used to how this feels on your bike. So now that we have our wheel off of our bike, we're gonna go into the steps of fixing a flat. So depending on the puncture, you might still have a little bit of air left in your tire. So what we're gonna do is, if you do have a valve cover, unscrew that. And you can use a set of keys, or you could use the end of your tire lever. If you have a tri-Allen handy and small enough, you could also use that to deflate the tube all of the way and get all the air out. If you have a Presta valve, we'll go over that in a little while. So once most of the air is out, I usually like to go all the way around the tire and just kind of squeeze and make sure that the bead is away from the rim. So now we have to go through the process of getting one side of the tire off of the rim. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start opposite of the valve stem. So valve stem is down here and I'm gonna be working up here. We're gonna take our tire lever and with the curved end, we're going to tuck it underneath the tire bead, like that. And then we're just gonna start working our way around the tire until the entire side of that bead is on the other side of the rim. Once that's done, we can take our tube out of our tire. And I'm gonna set my wheel down so I can inspect my tube to determine the cause of my flat. There are several flats that you can get while you're riding. The first one is a puncture, and that is just when a thorn or a nail goes through your tire and punctures your tube. If you can find the puncture, you'll just find one hole. There's also a pinch flat, or sometimes they're called snake bites, and that happens when the tube gets squished between the rim and the tire, maybe because of a hard impact on a curb or a rock, or if you had too low of pressure in your tires, it can also happen that way. So what I'm gonna do, I wanna figure out where the flat occurred on my tire or on my tube. I'm going to, if you have a hand pump and you're on the road, you can do this, or if you're at home, you can use your floor pump. And I'm just going to inflate the tire or the tube to maybe twice its normal size. And then just kind of listen and feel for where that puncture might have taken place. Whether you are replacing your tube or deciding to patch it, I like to try to find the hole, because then I know if it is a puncture, I really want to spend a lot of time looking in my tire and make sure that there isn't something that's still embedded in there that will cause the flat to happen all over again after I replace my tube. So next, I'm going to spend a little bit of time inspecting my rim and my tire to make sure there wasn't some damage that I need to address. You can inspect the inside of your tire with it still on the rim. If you decide to take it off of the rim, which is also fine, just know that tires are oftentimes directional, usually indicated by an arrow And in this case, we have our directional arrow here. I'm gonna go ahead and take my tire off of my rim. And then I'm just going to look inside the tire all the way around to see if I can find a puncture or any damage that might have occurred because of the flat. Next up, I'm gonna just take a quick peek at my rim and my rim tape to make sure that the rim doesn't have some significant damage to the metal and that the rim tape isn't cracked or ripped in any places, because if the rim tape is ripped, you're just gonna have a higher chance of getting another flat. And if that is the case, just take it into a bike shop and they'll be able to help you out and get that fixed. So now that I know that my rim and my rim tape is in good shape, if there was anything still left in your tire, you've removed that. Just be careful with your fingers. Sometimes, especially if you do a lot of road riding or commuting, you might get a piece of glass that's still stuck in there. So just be a little careful as you're running your fingers on the inside of your tire wall. From here, I'm going to put one side of my tire onto the rim. Usually I just work both sides around until everything fits in there nicely. So at this point, we are ready to replace our tube, or you might decide that you want to patch it. My recommendation for getting on the trail or back on the road the fastest is to just replace the tube. Sometimes you may find yourself on a really long road ride and maybe you only have one tube with you. In that case, replace the tube if you get a flat, and if you get another flat, that's a good time to patch your damaged tube. Or after you get home, if you want to patch a damaged tube, you could do that. Just know that the most reliable way to fix a flat is to just replace it with a brand new tube that hasn't been damaged. Times when you wouldn't want to patch a tube is if the hole is too big to repair or if the hole is too close to the valve stem. I'm not going to go through and show you how to use a patch kit and patch a tube, but there are other videos linked below that you can check out. Right now I'm going to have you pause the video so you can go to your own wheel and go through the steps of removing your tube and your tire so you can practice those skills. So now we are ready to put our tube and our tire back on our wheel. From here, I'm going to get one side of my tire onto the rim. I'm just going to start that process. Kind of use both of your hands to work the bead onto the rim of the wheel. So now you can see that I have one side of the tire on the rim and a big gap where the other bead still has to go onto the rim. From there, I'm going to grab my tube. And if you want, you can put a little bit of air into it. It can help get the tube into the tire a little bit easier. I found that it isn't too hard for me to just get it in there without any air inflated in the tube. Find your valve hole and put your valve through the hole and start tucking your tube into your tire. One thing to make sure of is that you don't get any twists in your tube as you're going around, so just kind of make sure that you're being mindful of that as you tuck your tube all the way around into your tire. And once everything is tucked, you're ready to start putting the bead onto the rim. And the way that we started when we took the tire off of the rim was opposite of the valve stem. Right now, since we're putting everything back on, we are starting with the valve stem and working our hands around, kind of opposite of each other, and then meeting up at the top. Until everything goes back onto the rim. So this was a pretty easy tire to put on. If you happen to have a tire that is a tighter bead or a tighter fit with the rim, there's a couple things that you can do. One of those things is the bead that's already all the way on the rim, just push it to the middle of the rim so the diameter is smaller, and it will allow for the bead that is going onto the rim to be a little bit easier to push or pull on. You can also push the valve with your thumb to give a little bit more space in the tire, and then you can pop the bead back onto the rim a little bit easier. So now we're ready to reinflate our tire. So we're just going to remember back to our where our PSI on our sidewall is and reference that before we go ahead and pump it back up. I'm going to set my wheel down and attach my pump. Usually when you reattach your pump and there's no air in your tube, the valve will push back up into your rim. To avoid this, you can push it down with the palm of your hand or with your thumb, and then that will keep the valve from pushing into the rim. And now I'm just going to start pumping it up, and as I'm doing this, I'm kind of keeping an eye on how everything is looking, and I'll actually pause and kind of inspect and make sure that the bead isn't popping off of the rim in any places. Everything still looks good. I'm just going to kind of keep an eye on this as I am reinflating. All right. And then when you go to take your pump head off of your valve, just try to make sure that you are pulling it as straight off as possible so you don't end up bending your valve stem. And if you have a Schrader valve, go ahead and put the cap back on. And now we're ready to put our wheel back onto our bike. So the two most common types of valve cores that you'll encounter are the Schrader valve, which looks just like the valve on your car tire, and the Presta valve. And I'm going to go through how to deflate or inflate your Presta valve if you have that on your bike. So in terms of opening up your Presta valve, you're just going to unscrew the middle piece there to open it up. If you're not sure if it is unscrewed all the way and open, just give it a tap, and if air comes out, that means that it is open all the way. If you were to be changing out a Presta valve tube, one thing that you'll want to keep in mind is that you need to unscrew this nut and take it all the way off of the valve in order to get the tube out of the rim. Once you're done inflating your tire, go ahead and close the valve. And if you aren't sure if it's closed all the way, give it a tap. And if air doesn't come out, that means it's closed and you're ready to go. So now we're ready to put our wheel back into our frame. What I'm going to do for this first step is I want to make sure that my cassette is in between my chain. So I'm going to move this part of my chain up and make sure that my cassette is in between there, and then just kind of slowly lower it down. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to lift up on the cage of my derailleur to pull the derailleur body kind of out and back, and then I can set my axle into the dropouts. And while I'm doing that, I'm also kind of keeping an eye on the rotor and making sure that it's going in between the brake pads. You also want to make sure that the axle is all the way into the dropout, so just kind of check each side and make sure that it is sitting in there all the way. Now I can tighten the nut until I have to use a pretty firm push to close my skewer, my quick release lever. Now that your wheel is back in the frame, make sure that you re-engage those brakes. Disc brakes, there isn't anything you have to do, but with rim brakes, you will want to re-engage those before you start riding. If you have a through axle, you will want to thread that all the way in. Right now, we're just working on a quick release. So in terms of putting the front wheel back into the frame, it's going to be very similar steps minus navigating the derailleur. We want to make sure that the rotor is going in between the pads and that the axle is all the way into the dropouts of the fork. And then don't forget to re-engage your front brakes after you put the wheel in. And that's how you fix a flat. I hope that was helpful. You will be able to find a link to a list of the steps on how to fix a flat so you can reference later. I do encourage people to practice this at home, maybe put it on your calendar as something that you do from time to time so these skills become more natural to you. Next, we're just gonna go over a couple tips on drivetrain maintenance. Caring for your drivetrain is a simple way to save money in the long run and keep your bike running smoothly. So a couple things that you're gonna need in order to care for your drivetrain are a bike chain specific lubricant and some clean rags. So in terms of the anatomy of our drivetrain, it is made up of several main components. We have our chain, our cassette, derailleurs, and our crank arms. The reason why drivetrain maintenance is important is because keeping our drivetrain clean and lubricated will prolong the life of the chain. Just from riding, our chain will show wear or start to wear. It's often referred to as chain stretch. And you can prolong the life of your chain and keep it in good working order by maintaining it properly. If you are riding on a chain that is too worn and too stretched out, what will happen is it will actually start to gouge into the teeth of the cogs, and replacing a chain is a relatively inexpensive fix, whereas having to replace a chain and a cassette and other drivetrain components is a much more expensive fix. When you're ready to lube your chain, there's 3 steps. You're gonna apply the lube, let it sit, and then you're gonna wipe it off with a rag. In terms of applying the chain lube to your chain, grab your lube, shake it up a little bit, and then you're gonna use 1 drop per link, which are these bumps along the chain. You're just gonna put 1 drop per link, grab your pedal backwards until you have a unlubed section of your chain, and then do that process the entire way around. So now that I'm finished lubing all of the links on my chain, I'm just gonna let it sit for a few minutes, and then I will wipe off any excess lubricant with a rag. So once your bike has sat for a little while, it's time to remove any excess lubricant from your chain. I usually like to give it about 10 minutes. The reason I like to wipe off any excess lubricant is because the chain will soak up what it needs, and anything that is excess will just attract more dirt and grime to your drivetrain. So in terms of removing excess, grab your rag, put it in your hand, and I just wrap it gently around the chain, and then I just slowly pedal backwards with my rag wrapped around my chain until I've gone a couple cycles all the way around and soaked up any excess lubricant from my chain. Most bike lubricants also act as a cleaner, and so you can see on my rag that I actually have quite a bit of dirt that came off when I wiped off that excess. If you happen to have a really dirty drivetrain and you see chunks of dirt and grime in between the actual cogs of your cassette, there are tools and special cleaning tools that you can get that you can remove that dirt and grime from your drivetrain. But oftentimes just lubing your chain when it needs to be lubed will keep it fairly clean and in good working order. I often get asked how frequently a person should lubricate their chain. And I wish I could give you a magic formula for that, but the truth is there's a lot of things that go into how often you need to lubricate your chain. The type of weather you're riding in, how often you're riding, if you are using a lighter or a heavier formula of chain lubricant. So usually what I like to tell people is if they have a newly serviced drivetrain, a brand new bike, maybe they just lubed their chain, try to remember what the sound of that healthy chain and drivetrain is like. And if you go on a ride and you start hearing your chain make more noise than normal, that is a good indication that when you get home, you should lubricate your chain so it's ready to go for your next ride. Under lubricating your chain or not lubricating your chain enough will cause issues including rust. The links can start to stick together. And over lubricating your drivetrain can also cause issues, which is why I tell people to listen to their chain for the chain to tell them how often they should lube it. Over lubricating your drivetrain will just attract more dirt and grime to it, so much so that sometimes the chain gets so gummed up that you have to replace it even if it is not worn. And even sometimes the drivetrain components like the cassette and the derailleur can get so gummed up that you need to use degreaser in order to break all of that grease and lubricant and road grime away from those components. Regardless of how well you maintain your drivetrain, part of riding a bike and being a bike owner is that your chain will wear and it will need to be replaced from time to time. You can either invest in a chain checker to check the wear of your chain, or feel free to bring it into any REI store and we will check your chain wear for free. If you need to remember any of these steps, we have a helpful drivetrain maintenance guide linked in the video. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.